March the 3rd, and you are Manjira Datta, director of Rasta Sub Bandhe, or something like that. All roads are closed, and we're going to talk about that film, maybe about your current film, about the situation of independent documentary in general in India, and we'll maybe improvise and see where it goes.
I'm really worried.
Really? Okay, well, we'll see. Maybe you could start by just telling me where you're coming from, where you were trained, and that kind of thing.
Well, I was basically a still photographer. I was trained in London in a 3-year course, comprehensive course, which included everything actually. But I was very keen to do educational TV, but when I came to India in '78, there was no opportunities really. So one drifted from one medium to the other because I knew photography, I knew a little bit of graphic art. So I used to design exhibitions, then do video films. And finally got into 16mm film, and there was enough money around, there was a sponsor around. And well, I'd made a film in the institute during my student days, but this is the first 16mm film I've made in my working life.
Why do you think so many of the filmmakers I've been talking to have had to go abroad for their training?
Well, my case was of course different, but it's also a class thing. Being able to afford to make films is a luxury here. And if you're rich enough, you go abroad and you get whatever you think is a good training, have a good time abroad, get exposed to the filmmaking circuit outside.
But it's actually much more common for documentary filmmakers to have studied abroad than for fictional directors. I'm not sure whether it's because the institute here is so good for that or what.
Well, I think because the whole attention in documentaries is very, very low over here. And even people who come out of the institute, their only ambition is to make feature films. That's really what is encouraged, I think. Even, for example, the directors and the archival people who come down from the institute to the film festivals, they prefer to see the feature films. And even if you invite them to come and see your documentary film, if it's even one of the 2 documentary films chosen for the festival, nobody bothers to turn up. This is my personal experience in '87 Indian Film Festival. So you can understand why people who are into documentaries find more encouragement perhaps outside than inside the country.
It's an interesting problem. Do you think this Western formation has left its mark on these films, or, for example, your own work? Do you think that is reflected in your own work?
I hope not, actually, in a sense, that I would like to see things as rather from my origin and background. But I'm sure there is a lot of westernized thinking, It's very easy to get colonized also into ideas, and you also get exposed to a lot of outside films. Not that necessarily it's a bad thing. You could pick up a lot of good things, ideas from outside. But I don't know to what extent it does influence you. But it's true, I haven't seen many documentaries here which is very original in its form, except the one you just told me, made by Arvindam. That sounds terrific about the elephants, the baby elephants, with the whole imagery.
It is terrific, but actually formally it reminded me of the style of maybe 30 years ago in the West, because it relies a lot on reconstruction and dramatization. But of course that's coming back in.
Yeah, that's very much back in.
So I'm not sure where he is. But are you conscious in your own work of any specific borrowings from your British period, your British context?
Well, you see, I've never been very impressed by British filmmaking, so I think it's something I've negated from my consciousness. I think they're very fairly poor filmmakers, except for the exceptional persons like Lindsay Anderson, but they make feature films, so I don't know that it has had much influence, but certainly if I see films from Latin America, it would inspire me more, but not, therefore it's not Western in that sense. I have seen some very good films from Australia by Dennis O'Rourke, which has impressed me, and I thought his technique was also pretty good. You know? So of course one does borrow, I'm sure. You know.
One of my theories is that, I mean, I sort of had an answer in mind when I asked you the question. One of my theories is that technically it's been very important because it's introduced 16 millimeter really to Indian documentary, because training in the West, you train primarily in 16 millimeter and you learn this idiom of, correct me if I'm wrong, of this portable and mobile direct cinema, which is completely unknown at the films division. And you learn to listen to people and to record their voices in a way that the films division does not do. But that could also be an indigenous impulse also. So, but I think that technically there is that influence there.
Well, you see, 16mm still is not very popular here, even amongst filmmakers. If you have enough money, I myself would go for 35mm because you get a larger scope for showing it around. Because we come to this distribution thing. I mean, you know, the labs are not geared for 16mm here. It's certainly nothing that encourages you to do 16mm. And I think people who are doing 16mm are foolhardy in doing it, frankly. But whether one has been influenced by this concept of mobility, well, now you've got video, which is so much more mobile, and you've got a finished product more or less. You just have to, you don't have to go through this whole processing and dependence on lab. I think in that case that should have caught on. 8mm should have caught on even more in terms of mobility, in terms of less dependence on infrastructure, less money, you know. But for some reason those things haven't caught on. I know a lot of people, even in West Germany, still shoot on Super 8 and do very good films, and they sell it, you know, they get back something out of it. So I don't know whether the 16mm is something which a few filmmakers at random in this country are doing or not.
It's an interesting problem because there are millions of 16mm projectors around this country, and yet there still isn't a kind of, I mean, why don't we talk about distribution now, because we're already there? I mean,
okay, the thing is, one of the primary reasons perhaps is because the 16mm projectors, though they are all over the country, they are under the government control. They've been distributed by the state governments to schools, colleges, community centers, etc. Now, they are to show specifically films made by Films Division, that's by the government, or by the state government. It's not meant for people outside who make films. Their films are not seen as valid films to be shown by the government. And in fact, I took a workshop 3 years ago in Madhya Pradesh, and they'd called all the administrative officers and everybody. They said they wanted to solve this problem. Okay, they had 50 people over. They called me and a few other freelance filmmakers, and they said, suggest ways we can solve, how we can buy, we have money, we can buy, we should build up our archives of material. But the minute they put the proposal to the Chief Minister, who's the head of the state, he said, nothing doing. We can't have outsiders bringing in new ideas into the state, which doesn't go with our thinking. For example, even as part of this program, they invited me to go and make a film on a land reform policy, for urban legislation policy. They had said they're going to give out land to poor people in the middle, at the heart of the city. The only comment which was negative in that film was that it shouldn't go the way the rural land reforms have gone. Immediately they said, no, we'll give you the money, but this is it. We can't have such films being shown to everybody around the state. Finito. Yeah? So you cannot take advantage of this infrastructure. It's as simple as that.
And there's no scope for alternative distribution through trade unions or community groups or women's groups?
Well, I've now started approaching trade unions, but you see, again, they don't have any money of their own. You, as a filmmaker, the producer, director, have to raise the money. Give it to them to buy a projector or give them the funds to show it around. They really have no money, spare money, the progressive groups, to indulge in filmmaking, because till they are convinced about its power, they will not invest 7,000, 8,000 rupees for a projector, 16mm projector. Okay? So this will take some time, I think, before you convince anybody that. And the filmmaker is too burdened with responsibilities at the end of it all.
Okay, well, let's come back to your own work. As a photographer, were you doing work that sort of anticipated what you're doing now in film? Is there some kind of continuity there?
Well, it started not as a photographer, it started only as a tourist in the mountains, actually. And more out of curiosity to see parts of India which is a middle class, upper middle class, coming from upper middle class, I hadn't bothered to see. All my childhood was spent in hotels, even if I went visiting. So you just saw a very superficial glimpse of the country. And then when I started working, I started going around with research people, academics actually, helping them out in their research and taking photographs. And also because I joined British Council as the media in charge in '78 after I came here. And one of the involvement was with projects which British people aid in India or are involved with. They were health projects, for example, something called primary health centers, you know, taking the healthcare to the villages. Then education, environmental education in schools, and you know, many other areas, science, you know, appropriate technology in villages. So I was going with actually scientists or research people, and that's when I started making short films on video for British Council as a gift to be given as part of the project. I suggested the idea to British Council. Adult education, women's adult education started in '77, '78. I was one of the original people involved in making programs. I made a 3-part tape slide program which we transferred on video and showed it around, found it was effective training tool. And then I heard that many other people were also making small films, etc. So that was the first initiation, perhaps.
So your origins are less as a photographer pertaining to this work than as a kind of literacy, media, educational.
Yes, I think
worker.
more as that, but I've always been a very small part of projects or help being given or inter-exchange with the Indian government originally. And then I realized that you can't work in a foreign agency in a country as sensitive in India and do anything realistic and understand the problems unless you leave your job.
So you did?
Yes. That was the only way to get acceptance also, because there is a great allergy by people to people who are in these very cushy jobs.
So how did the project get conceived, and We're talking about all roads are closed.
Yeah, well, the project in '79 originally, I went with this friend of mine. She was writing an article on that area, and she wanted me to go with her just to be with her, be a friend, collect some data if I could. I didn't know much Hindi then, so I just went. I thought, oh, great, you know, a
You're
little bit of
originally
trekking.
from Bengal,
Oh,
just to
right.
establish this in the
Yeah.
interview.
I'm originally from Bengal, so I know Bengali and I knew English, and that's it. See? So I just started picking up Hindi when I came to Delhi and decided to stay. And I've never been trekking to such remote areas, such backward areas in India. And so I just treated it as a holiday originally. And then I got more and more involved in the research of this article, and we had such a good time. These people invited us repeatedly. Every 6 months there'd be a letter, so they'll keep in touch with us, either come and visit us or we'd go and visit them.
These were the people already working in that area?
Yes, they're the people who live in Jonsar Bawar. That is the area where we shot the film. One of the specific villages called Lakhamandal. And it's a very well-known village in a sense that it has some, stone sculptures which were found 8000 AD and things like that. So there's a lot of interest. Archaeologists are interested, anthropologists are interested in that area.
So your contacts were people who were already working with the Harijans?
Yes, because they were doing specifically article on bonded labor and the status of women in this area. And ultimately, the film was based on this article because I've been very closely involved and had been taking photographs right through, getting more and more familiar with the people, but just as a friend's friend. But then I decided, well, why not make a film on that area? Because they'd been approached by 4 or 5 filmmakers, and they said, oh, they're just filmmakers, we can't allow that, people to come and pry into our lives, which is innermost details of our lives. And
you told me originally that they were already very suspicious of filmmakers because of the previous film or films that had been made in that neighborhood. Could you tell that story again?
Yes, well, one of the reasons perhaps they refused a lot of subsequent filmmakers is because from Films Division, a film was made by a very well-known filmmaker called Sukhdev. But the way the ethics or lack of ethics which he used in making that film is quite a sad story, which we heard much later on over there as we got to know them. Was they said he got them drunk, got them to say a few things, or took shots which was very suggestive, which he edited in a very suggestive way.
Of the women who...
Of the women talking, or the man just sitting there. The young man, in fact, who was Bisla's husband. Bisla is one of the girls who becomes a prostitute later on, we see in my film, much later on. So, and the way he has cut the film, using material which he has shot in Delhi, of dancing, belly dancing, and people's drinking and things like that, which is not the setup into which, this is not the level of prostitution by the women from this area. The women from this area are actually agricultural women. They're simple people. They didn't know why they're coming into the city. They're practically sold by their husband to repay their debts, bonded debts. So they're actually very poor prostitutes. And the men who even sell them, that's their husbands, they also act as pimps, or they actually help them cook the food during the day and clean their room, at a very low level. They never go and dance anywhere. They're not these exotic creatures or sensational characters with which Sukhdev has juxtaposed, and given us suggested that it's much more. So it's really, that was one of the main reasons. After they saw the film, they said, well, we can't trust any film.
I heard also that there was violence after his film, and that one of the women who had spoken in his film was killed almost immediately afterwards.
Is that so? I didn't know.
This is what I heard. I forget.
I know there was a lot of unrest. I know there was a lot of suspicion of filmmakers for many years. He had made it about 78 or...
It was during the emergency.
And so it was a very tense time, and it won awards, which makes it worse for the people who were there. Because for the wrong reason it won awards, they felt.
It's very, very voyeuristic, I found, in the way it deals with prostitution.
Yes, because you've seen the film I've made, and it's the same characters. You're seeing who's become older.
Very different.
And the reasons for going into prostitution, and not at all the reasons he has implied, perhaps, in the way he has cut the film.
And so the project developed from this article. Your project?
Yes, from this article, then we put in a proposal to a voluntary organization, which was also publishing this article. So we said, well, why don't you get hold of some funds and we can make a film of this area, because already the researcher and I have been involved with this community for so long, and they've agreed that we should film them. As long as we filmed everybody we had been talking to, and give them a fair enough chance to put their points forward and not cut it in a voyeuristic way. This was one of the promises we had to make.
So your mention of editing actually makes sense, thinking back at your film, because a lot of the interviewing involves a lot of long takes and a lot of listening to the actual people. It's very impressive how you got them to speak so personally and in such detail about their lives. So that the fact that you already had this prior relationship makes sense. Could you talk a little bit about actually filming these people and getting them to speak?
Well, you see, this was done because it was done over a period of time. We had started getting them used to the camera. First we took, well, my still camera, then we took the Bolex without sync sound. And so everybody, by the time we took the 16mm camera, they got used to the concept of a camera coming and intruding into their lives. But there was, in these villages, there's hierarchy is very much to be respected by an outsider. So we had to go to this guy who was mustache, big mustache, Nen Singh, who's really the village leader of that place. Now we had to start with him. This is ethics or morality, whatever it is. It's the way things are done, and so we were told that we must start with him. So we went to him, and till that time we've been very, very close friends with him. And suddenly he just clammed up. For 4 hours he sort of really wanted to test us out. Okay, we've seen you for 3 years talking about it, but do you mean it? And then after 4 hours of losing a lot of footage, he suddenly decided that he's going to talk. And he's really going to say what he thinks. His real deep feelings, his hostility, his understanding of this other section, the Harijan section which exists in the community, his viewpoint of how land should be distributed, what has been done, etc. But it came like a burst, because he suddenly looked at me after 4 hours and he said, okay, now I know you want the truth, and because I think of you as my sister deep down, I'll say it. I know you will misconstrue it, you'll work it against me, whatever, but since you're not saying anything either way, I'll say it, because I know you're not going to leave me. And of course that was like a bursting out. And of course there were Harijan boys and girls sitting there and listening to him. And in the film he calls them many names. He criticized the government for excusing the indebtedness of Harijans. He says, I've lost 20,000 rupees in the way that with sweeping legislation the government does away with our debts. And is this the kind of justice? For him it is not a justice. He has not received any justice. And it's not just because we are from the upper caste, we are not like a wall on which everybody can lean on, he says. This imagery of a wall was a very striking imagery, I thought, because that's what he thought of himself. In spite of all the feudal oppression, there was a wall on which the whole society leant on, and he was the supportive role in the thing. But when everybody around heard what he said, in the villages everything travels very fast, within seconds, then everybody decided now they can say what they like.
Oh, wow.
Deep down. You know?
So he actually turns out to be the bad guy of the film, doesn't he? And yet he spoke to you on the basis of this friendship that you had established.
Well, I don't think he's the bad guy in the film, because we also use him right in the beginning to explain his perception of how the caste system originated. It is his whole attitude towards certain understanding of the caste and class factors, which of course, as a filmmaker, to be quite honest, one had taken a stand on, because politics is so subtle in this country, it's so involved, so, I mean, not so simple to understand at all. In fact, perhaps it was the first time I really understood agricultural politics when I made this film. With the layers and layers of problems. The fact that he turns out to be a bad guy is when you juxtapose it with people who are really moved by their problems, who see themselves doing it and condemning themselves, what he thinks of them as pigs. And the men who are guilty of putting the women into prostitution also condemns themselves as they talk, if you remember. In the film, they also say we have committed many sins by taking our wives and selling them in the cities. But they see it with great misery. They're miserable because of what they are doing. There's a lot of compassion in the way they see their problems and their compromises. I think an outside viewer would see him as a bad guy, I suppose.
Well, you also do respect the complication and the subtlety of this context. It's true. You never say that, you never take sides explicitly, but you do so in the editing. I mean,
yeah, I think I do so quite. I think I've changed a lot since then, because one goes through different phases, political phases in one's life. And when things move very fast when you're shooting, and there are oppositions who come and tell you different stories, you tend to get influenced in the heat of the moment. And of course you have to take sides somewhere when you are editing. At least the way it was shot. Maybe if I had a totally different stylistic approach to the whole thing, it might have been different when I edited it.
Can you talk a little bit more about editing it and the process of...
Well, you know, to be quite frank, Tom, I totally disagree with the way I edited it now. Today I'm a different person from what I was.
And that's your right.
Yeah, a couple of years ago. And because I also started seeing the world very differently. And my influences are very different now, and I think that's a very healthy thing. So, in a sense, I wouldn't have edited it the way which is a very straight kind of editing, which pinpoints things. Perhaps I also wanted to do it because I felt that was going to be more like an awareness tool in the hand of progressive groups there. There is no political progressive groups in that area. And I was linked with progressive groups who want to start a base there. And ultimately I hope they will take this film around. In fact, I'm still talking to them that when their base is built, they should take this film around and show it. So it was supposed to be more a way of, if you could call it propaganda in a certain way, it is so. I don't deny that at all. So it had to reach out to a lot of people who have been totally puzzled by this kind of system for a very long time. And, you know, and perhaps show them the many layers and levels and why those oppressions have come about. And so it was perhaps one-sided in the way it was edited. Because the audience is not, it was a very different audience when we had. The fact that other people have seen it in cities and festivals.
So this was not your primary intended audience?
Yes.
You really still haven't reached this?
Really, we haven't reached the people we want to show it to. Why land reforms have failed, why bondage still exists, why it happened in the first place, and the multi-layered and leveled problems of the status of a woman in this place.
This concept of dividing the film into two parts, with one part about caste and class and the other part about gender, was this a concept you had from the beginning, or was it something?
No, actually it was, I'm afraid, sorry to say, it was practically forced on me later on by some of the people who were part of the producer team. And I totally disagreed with it. But I wanted to do the cutting in a very different way after a certain point. But maybe it's my own weakness that I gave in. And also I saw that the gender problem had to be brought out. But somewhere I wasn't able to marry it as smoothly, as convincingly, knitted, as I would like to have done, which I originally had conceived of. You know, I really didn't want to bring in this upper caste women at the beginning of their status, in the beginning of the second part of the film. But this was, since one was working with a team of people, one had to respect other people's wishes also, so it's part of that compromise in the way it was edited.
It's it has a very interesting effect, because on the one hand it makes things very, very clear, but at the same time it confuses things in terms of making you aware of all these different layers and levels, and it almost adds a kind of irony to the whole picture. But you wanted to do it much more continuously,
Yes, I want to do it much more continuously, but there were certain ideological clashes about it, certain, I think, well, different kind of understanding of what a film should do and how a film should be seen by audience, by the different people who were in the group, who were thinking. Also I wanted their participation in the group. So to respect all these things, perhaps one did do a lot of things, because I totally now disagree with it, the way it's been done, to be quite frank. But I don't disagree with the way that it's a very lengthy film, etc. I've told you this earlier, why it is lengthy. It's the repetitive process. That's been one of the main criticism from the middle class viewers, in fact.
Do you now agree with this, that it should have been shorter and more to the point?
Maybe some of it from the first part could have been knocked off. But I don't necessarily agree with what people say, that it's like, I think you have to work at things, you have to try to understand that bondage is a very slow process, a very subtle process, and there are many kinds of bondage. Within those many kinds, again, there's a subtlety about the way everybody say their kind of bondage. It makes it valid.
Still, there is a lot of resistance to the idea of a 1 hour documentary in this country for some reason.
Nobody has any attention span, I think, except for feature films.
Well, it's harder to show a 1 hour film in the context of a discussion and an animation, I suppose. I don't know.
Well, you see, there's another criticism of the film has been that it's a very speech-oriented film. Too many testimonial-like things. There's not enough visuals to build up the whole atmosphere of the place.
Well, I didn't respond that way. I thought that there was a very good balance, and the way you use speech very often over a visual, I thought was very effective, and I felt that the visuals of the work, the agricultural work and housework of the women was very strong, were very strong.
And that's been taking over years observation. You know, I mean, it's a very strange thing, because there's always a debate about it. Do you let a character who's speaking so well speaking right from their heart and who seldom has an opportunity to speak out in any forum. Do you let them be on the screen, or do you cut them off? Or, you know, keep on building the environment around which it's equally valid. Perhaps if one had thought about it a bit more, if one had more footage. Also, we were a little bit constrained about film, raw stock and things like that. Maybe I would have taken a little bit more interiors, exteriors, getting a feel of the environment of the person talking a little bit more. I agree with that criticism. Maybe there's not been enough sensitivity visually. But also, you see, because it was something very deep they were talking about, they would say it in a burst of 10 minutes and that's over. After that, they will not talk about it at all. And it's Mangatram, who's the Harijan leader, suddenly drags me off in the middle of the night and says, shoot. I've decided tomorrow I'm leaving. Though I gave you the date tomorrow, daytime, I've decided I'm leaving. And you want to shoot me, you can shoot me now. Like, that's 11 o'clock at night. And there's no electricity there. You carry these 2 Jeep batteries with you. You had some projector lamps with you, thank God. So you use those projector lamps to light up, and he says, okay, half an hour, that's it, you shoot now. You ask me whatever question, if I choose to, I tell you. So under these conditions, and that's of course documentary filmmaking, it's not easy to be very sensitive visually.
Still though, the way you edited, sort of after the fact, I thought added a lot to those testimonies. And I suppose those images of work were all the Bolex
yes, a lot of
images that you shot earlier.
Yeah.
The other thing I noticed about sound was that you relied quite a lot on the commentary, but it was a very original kind of commentary compared to the standard here, which is the authoritarian voiceover. Can you talk about your thinking in terms of the commentary?
Well, you see, the commentary, in fact, I really would have preferred not to have a commentary voice at all. If one of the characters could have, and I tried my best at the editing level to try and link it up together. And somehow or the other, when we tried to include the questionnaire for this film, it didn't seem to work. We started cutting it like that. I don't know why, it just didn't seem to come together. I couldn't tell you why. So when it came to writing the commentary, one had to be that careful and apprehensive also, because right from the beginning, I was very diffident about the way I should write the commentary, the scripting, because everybody else has talked so well and so much more powerfully than I have the ability to write or conceive of a commentary, that all I could do was underplay it as much as possible and just give a link, provide the links rather than anything else.
You did that very well. I mean, you don't tell people what to think on the commentary. It's very low-key in a way. You're asking questions rather than telling interpretations, which I thought was very effective. In a way, actually, it reminded me of some of the British commentaries of some of the sort of the experimental documentaries, that the sort of the BFI kind of films. I don't know whether you ever saw any of those.
Yes, some I saw.
But maybe that's because I just read the English version and didn't hear the Hindi.
Maybe, but you know, because in Hindi it's a bit different, because it's a little bit more political, the Hindi commentary. Because it's supposed to swing the people a little bit this way or that way. Not very different from what you read in English. And there I tried to, at least in the beginning, try to bring out my bafflement of the place and the problem. That's how I start. Like I just don't know, you know, there's this strange, beautiful place, and what the underlying problems are. You know, it's a discovery, a process of discovery, which I'm unable to analyze till much later. And that's the Hindi commentary. But it's always been that approach, because really at that time, as I said, even then I was not very politically tuned in to
well, the approach works because the spectator's having that same reaction, that this is a beautiful, exotic, picturesque landscape you're showing us.
And that's something which was disturbing me right through the shoot, because startlingly clear blue skies in February, you know, everything's so sparklingly clean, and you know, I just like everything is made for them.
It's hard to believe that there's all this violence, brutality, and exploitation going on.
Yeah, it's all a very quiet resentment which rules this fabric of the society. It's so difficult. That's the level I didn't feel I was confident enough as a filmmaker to bring out that level. And maybe in 20 years' time, if I shoot this film, I'll do it differently.
Can you talk a little bit about your current project?
Yes, I hope this current project will show my maturity as I see it now. Because after editing Raste Bande Sab and seeing it a year later, I said, what the hell have I done, you know, to myself? In respect of the form of the film. I've become very interested in the form of the film also. And I did listen very carefully to what people were saying or being critical of the film. I really appreciated the criticisms, because it just not because of that they were valid at all times, but because it challenges me to think another way. And lately also I've been exposed to more films on an international level, because one has been to more festivals and met more filmmakers from outside, current filmmakers from outside, and one has been reading a lot of current Latin American literature and talking to Indian authors also, who have also attempted to understand literature very differently, especially Hindi authors. Now, Hindi literature has not developed to the extent which, say, a Bengali literature has developed. But one day I just read this short story in a Hindi magazine, which was about a lizard, the magical powers of this lizard, you see, and the belief and superstitions. And it's been written by a very political person, whom I know is a very political person, scriptwriter. And then I saw that this straight view, head-on view of politics, the goodies and the baddies, is also a very mature perception of politics, you know, things around us. And maybe Marxism hasn't taken things like culture, superstition, all the other things which bring out a society. We haven't examined the individual enough. And all this question has been raised by everybody now. And when I read different literature, of course, these imageries, the power of imageries has really grown. It is so, I mean, enormous, the scope of exploring these imageries. So in the latest film, we're doing it in a place called Bihar. It's one of the richest coal mining areas in the country, where there's the background of the Indian mafia exploiting the workers there, exploiting the wealth, because they were there before the industry was nationalized. Now, the community in which we shot the film is a community where they recycle the waste of the industry. In this case specifically, it's the slurry or the waste which comes out of a coal washery. And it comes out through rivulets. These people intervene in the process, that's the workers intervene in the process, catch the slurry and recycle it into prime coking coal, for which they find a market. But even in this process, the contractors are involved, everybody else is involved. Now, visually, when I first went, I was absolutely overwhelmed by the place, because it's something to see a man or a woman neck deep in the slime and slurry, which is absolutely black, working like that for hours at a stretch, coming out of these ponds like beings from another planet, you know, and working in the night. There are fires, thousands of fires lit up, and in that heat, which is absolutely unbearable, they're carrying on their lives. And there's no facilities, there's just no facilities at all. There's no health facilities, there's no water. They're digging into the riverbed to get out their drinking water. Every kind of hell you can imagine, you see there. So of course, as a visual person, one felt absolutely overwhelmed and thought, oh great, one can make a film here of this kind. And then of course, because there's great politics in that area, there are different political people there with different political reasons for their interests, the left even and the right. So it was very confusing what to come out with, but then I decided it had to be something very simple because it was so confusing. The whole story of industrialization, pollution, marginalization of laborers because they don't have work in the agricultural area, they don't have work in the industry area, they've come to this area of waste, the human waste. Whereas I just can't grapple with this in a film. It'll be mammoth, it'll go into parts, and I can't raise that kind of money. So we took a visual imagery, we looked for visual imagery. So I was photographing over about 4 or 5 trips, visits. And then we found this little pink memorial tablet, which we was told later on is memorial tablet. And what is this? So they said, well, all the people who have died a political death, or whatever is seen as a political death, whatever is seen as a sacrifice for continuing the fight against contractors, against oppressors, they are given this little memorial tablet. And the day is observed. And that day every year is observed not because of them as individuals, but because of what his sacrifice meant, what his martyrdom meant, and what it means in contemporary day society. So this is a day of getting together our thoughts and trying to bring different unions together and continue the fight. So I just came back and it didn't click for a long time, and I picked up Marquez's Chronicle of a Death Foretold. And this death, again, just kept on thinking there's something in common between that death and this death, though it wasn't love, death for love or anything like that. But there must be something, in the way Marquez has thought it out very differently. He doesn't give the facts of the story. He interprets the story through inaccurate memories, wrong interpretations of the death, so many other things which influences the death. When we go back the next time, we asked why this death happened. And that's when we get the many stories of the death. And the many stories, in fact, we found it very interesting, covers all the points. All the social forces which operate in this area. The mafia, the gundism, the death could be for the mafiaism, it could be for the gundism, because of the oppression of women. There were many stories, many interpretations why this death happened. I didn't find the actual incident very interesting. Okay, there was firing and he got a bullet in his chest, whatever it is. It varied anything from bullet in his chest to bullet in his stomach to him getting beaten to death. But that's when I realized the power of storytelling, and that you can say something like that as politically as you can say another very direct political statement. So this film we've already shot because the Memorial Day was on the 1st of February. So we've shot for a period of time there. It was quite an amazing experience because very few filmmakers have gone to that area and come out of it okay and shot there. There are many establishment problems also over there. And I think, I'm just hoping it'll be a very different kind of film structurally.
Have you seen the rushes already?
No, I'm waiting for it. This is one of the problems in India. The lab lets you down. I've seen the negatives, they're okay. But I've come away 2 weeks. We have been promised the rushes are coming, so I'm just waiting. It's a lot of patience.
You talked about Marxism. Can you maybe talk about politics in terms of your own personal political affiliation, but also the way culture fits into left-wing politics in this country? Is there a tradition on the left of cultural work such as what you're doing that you are working within? Or
I wish there was. I will start with your last question. I wish the left took a little bit more interest in cultural things, because I don't know if you know, some of the states are controlled by the left. The two most highly developed cultural states, Kerala and Bengal. But unfortunately the left failed to, in spite of a lot of promises of building up vast infrastructure for the cinema. It has failed to do so. It has failed to give grants to small filmmakers. It has invited the big establishment filmmakers or accepted art filmmakers to come and make films for them, which have always been bombed, because they wanted something dry like land reforms into a story. And of course there are very interesting stories which bring out these concepts, but somehow it's not been able to capitalize on it. So though I'm very sympathetic and a supporter of the left, the Marxist left, the CPM it's called, and I belong to the women's organization on the mass front. I'm not a member of that. I've not found any support in creative terms, none actually. But it has helped me to understand the politics of the left, and it does help to be on the progressive side when you're making a film and you go into this area where only with the protection of a political group can you work. It's true that that kind of support, when you express an interest and you stay with, I researched in this area for a year when I already had this idea within 3 months. But it was necessary not to go after the 3rd month, because you have to establish your credentials, your credibility in a very real way. It's not enough to say, I belong to this women's group which is affiliated with you in Delhi. They test you out continuously, constantly, and that's a very interesting process, because you learn a lot. As much as you learn about the left from the city, you learn from the village. Mm-hmm. You learn where your weakness lies in your understanding and where their weaknesses lie. So that kind of support you do get at the grassroots level. And for example, without the left and the other progressive tribal forces there, we couldn't have shot in that place. It was simple as that. And now, of course, I think the left is going through some crisis itself everywhere, all over the world, and we are feeling the crisis here. Mm-hmm. In terms of rethinking of the perspective of the left, and I found that in East Germany when I went there this time. And I think it's a very healthy thing, actually. It's a very healthy trend to re-examine yourself and change your ideology also to cater to the present day, the demands of a capitalist society which is growing more and more powerful and very differently from what you anticipated politically. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So what is the prognosis here in India for people doing your kind of work? Do you find any kind of optimism?
Well, I hope, one's got to go on hoping, that's the only thing, because you don't get actually any real support. Even people don't want to distribute your films unless you give the money to them. Nobody really wants to fund your films. And even the film festival here don't want to show your films. Mm-hmm. So
do you find more support from the women's network than from...
No, there's been no difference really. I think it's equal everywhere. The problem, it just stays. Mm-hmm. Nobody seems to take any interest because of the documentary form, most probably. Mm-hmm. because we are so used to
surprising in a way, though, because there is a certain amount of flourishing in women's publishing and periodicals and feminist culture, at least in the urban areas, and they're not interested in film.
It's a very sad thing.
It is?
At least that's my experience. Everybody prefers to talk about it than to see evidence of it. For some reason it frightens them, I think. They're unable to come to terms with reality, and when you're pitched inside reality and in your country, it's a much more difficult concept to tackle at a conceptual level.
Can we finish by maybe you're talking a little bit about the root of all evil, money, financing, how you finance the current film, for example?
One thing is money. Nobody wants to lend you money. There's no credit system here. Well, that's something which is startling to an outsider, especially a Westerner. It doesn't matter how much you work, you never make enough money as a director. So the only way, I got this brilliant idea when I went abroad, in fact, for the last film festival. When I was offered, quite unknowingly to me, I was offered money for just selling screening rights. I thought to myself, great. Because I don't want anybody to fiddle around with my form, because I'm experimenting. I don't know if it's going to succeed or even be okay, frankly. I know it'll be visually powerful. I know we've got very good interviews. People have talked very well, but I really don't know how it's going to work out. So I can't promise anybody anything, nor do I want anybody interfering in the editing process or being a co-producer, because a co-producer here, a foreigner co-producer, means you have to go through bureaucratic channels, and it takes 2 years to get permission for any kind of co-production, and then you have to know very big people. So, and these areas are sensitive. So I wouldn't like to take foreign money straight out. You know, it's got to be without any strings attached. And I heard about this system of people giving money, very little money. They're giving you 1/100th of what they give to a foreign filmmaker. But to me, it makes me able to start on my project. And that's what I opted for in this film. And now I think if I show the rushes, I can collect money from ABCD to finish the film, even if no more money is forthcoming. I feel very confident.
From AB?
Well, ABC, it could be even you. I say, okay, you know, like my editor has volunteered to do the editing free if necessary. You know, people just come and they respond. The sound recorders took half his fees because he said he felt so moved by this experience. And since there wasn't enough money yet, okay, I mean, you know, I didn't need to pay him. And I think that's enough encouragement to go ahead.
Good. Okay. Yeah. Do you want to add any final brilliant manifesto?
No. None, I think that's enough.
Good.
Talking.
Thank you very much, Manjira. And I'll just tilt up to get final images. Kate Kollwitz. Okay.